The sky over Lusaka was heavy and gray the day Naledi buried her father. The churchyard was filled with people in black, whispering condolences, their faces a blur through her tears. She stood quietly by the grave, clutching a white rose, her heart aching as the priest's voice faded into the wind. Her stepmother, Vera, stood front and center, crying loudly, wiping her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Everyone around believed her display, but Naledi didn't. She had lived with Vera long enough to know the difference between real pain and a performance. Her father had been a powerful man, a respected real estate investor who built half of Lusaka's skyline. After her mother died, he remarried Vera, a woman with a polished smile and a heart that turned cold the moment the wedding ended. From then on, Naledi was treated like a stranger in her own home. The meals, the family photos, even the smallest conversations, everything made her feel like she didn't belong. After the burial, people gathered at the mansion. Vera took the center of attention again, her voice sharp beneath the fake sympathy. "Your father left everything to me," she announced, glancing at Naledi. "You're young, you'll find your own path." Naledi said nothing. She just nodded, her face calm but her mind steady, because she knew something Vera didn't. 2 days before his death, her father had taken her hand and said softly, "My girl, the companies and accounts are in your name. Don't tell anyone until you're ready." Now, standing in the middle of the crowd, Naledi smiled faintly through her tears. She knew her time was coming, and Vera's act would soon fall apart. The mansion that once felt like home now echoed with emptiness. A week after the funeral, Vera began showing her true colors. She moved through the house like a queen reclaiming her throne, wearing dark sunglasses and barking orders at everyone. The first thing she did was sell Naledi's father's cars, the black Mercedes, the silver Range Rover, even the classic Jaguar he had loved so much. Next went his jewelry, his watches, and the paintings from the living room. Every item that held a memory was turned into cash. Then she fired all the workers who had served the family for years. The driver, the cook, the gardener, all gone within a day. They had been loyal to Naledi's father, and Vera couldn't stand that kind of loyalty around. "I need a fresh start," she told everyone, pretending it was for business reasons. But Naledi knew the truth. Vera wanted control, and she wanted it fast. A few days later, Vera stood at Naledi's bedroom door with a smug smile. "You can't stay here rent-free," she said coldly. "This is my house now." Naledi didn't argue. She quietly packed her clothes, her late mother's necklace, and her father's last letter. That was all she took, one suitcase for a lifetime of memories. When she finally opened the letter that night in a small guesthouse room, her hands trembled. Her father's familiar handwriting filled the page. Inside were documents, the details of an offshore account, property deeds, and company shares worth over $50 million. He had trusted her completely. She sat on the edge of the bed, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You knew she'd do this, didn't you, Papa?" Naledi could have walked into Vera's office the next day and claimed everything, but she didn't. She wanted to see how far Vera's greed would go. So she decided to stay quiet and let the world believe she had nothing. She rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Lusaka, a modest place with peeling paint and thin walls. She found work at a small cafe nearby, blending in easily with the other workers. Meanwhile, Vera was busy showing off. She threw parties, wore designer clothes, and bragged to anyone who would listen. "That girl is nothing without my husband's money," she told her friends with a laugh. "She'll come crawling back soon enough." But Naledi never did. While Vera was busy chasing luxury, Naledi was learning patience. Every night, she read her father's letter again, reminding herself of his words and his trust. She watched from a distance as Vera's greed grew, knowing that the higher she climbed on her lies, the harder the fall would be. And deep down, Naledi promised herself one thing. She wouldn't just take back what was hers. She would rise in silence, and when the time came, she'd make sure Vera saw exactly what kind of girl she had underestimated. Life at the cafe was simple but peaceful. Every morning, Naledi tied her apron, greeted customers with a warm smile, and served coffee to tired office workers rushing to start their day. Nobody there knew who she really was. Not the manager, not the regulars who joked with her, and not the young barista who had a crush on her. To them, she was just Naledi, the quiet girl who worked hard, never complained, and always stayed late to clean up. For the first time in years, she felt free. There were no fake smiles, no cold stares from Vera, no mansion filled with tension. Her small apartment near the cafe wasn't much, but it was hers. She'd sit by the window at night, eating noodles and watching the city lights flicker in the distance. On the outside, she looked like any struggling young woman in Lusaka, but in her heart, she carried a secret bigger than anyone could imagine. While Naledi worked in peace, Vera's greed was spinning out of control. She had started dating a younger man named Tobias, charming, smooth-talking, and always dressed like he had money, even though he didn't. He whispered in her ear that she should cash out while she could. Why hold on to old buildings and slow investments, he said. Sell them and enjoy your life. Vera, blinded by flattery and vanity, listened. She began selling off her late husband's remaining properties for quick money, not realizing she was digging her own grave. Every time another one of her father's assets appeared on the market, Naledi noticed. She still had access to some of his old records, hidden on a flash drive he'd once given her. Each night, after finishing her shift, she'd sit at her little kitchen table with her laptop open, going through the reports. The numbers told a painful story. Vera was dismantling everything her father had built, piece by piece. The empire that once stood tall was being destroyed by greed. Naledi didn't cry this time. Instead, she started making quiet moves. Through her father's trusted lawyer, Mr. Chibwe, she began buying back key properties, not under her real name, but through a new company. It was slow, silent work. She used the offshore account her father had left her, transferring small amounts at a time, so nothing looked suspicious. Each purchase felt like reclaiming a piece of him. Meanwhile, Vera was too distracted by Tobias and her shopping sprees to notice anything strange. She thought she was winning, but the truth was, she was selling everything to the one person she had thrown away. At the cafe, Naledi kept smiling, pouring lattes, and living her quiet double life. Nobody around her knew that the girl cleaning tables by day was slowly becoming one of the most powerful women in Lusaka by night. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The morning Naledi decided to visit her father's old lawyer. The city felt different. The air was crisp, the streets buzzing with noise, but her mind was calm. She wore a plain blouse and carried a small brown bag. Nothing that hinted she was about to change her life. The law office was tucked inside an old building downtown, the same one her father used to take her to when she was little. The brass sign still read Chibwe and Partners. She took a deep breath and walked in. Mr. Chibwe looked up from his desk the moment she entered. His face softened into a knowing smile. "Naledi," he said, standing to shake her hand. "Your father knew you'd come." Those words hit her like a wave. She hadn't even said why she was there, but somehow, it felt like he'd been waiting for this day. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick brown envelope, sealed and marked with her father's initials. "He left this for you," Mr. Chibwe said quietly. Inside were documents, property titles, business registrations, account details, everything her father had built over decades. "You're the legal heir to it all," the lawyer explained, sliding the papers toward her. "But you must be patient. The vultures will circle the moment they smell power. Move quietly." Naledi nodded. She read each page carefully, her father's name appearing again and again beside her. He had planned everything, down to the last signature. There was no emotion on her face, just a quiet strength in her eyes. She signed the transfer documents one by one, her hands steady. With each stroke of her pen, she took back another piece of what was stolen, the companies, the land, the accounts. When they finished, Mr. Chibwe leaned back in his chair. "Your father always said you had his mind," he told her with a small smile. "Now it's time to prove him right." As Naledi stepped out of the office, the late afternoon sun hit her face. The world around her looked the same, cars honking, people rushing, vendors shouting, but she felt different. Something had shifted inside her. She was no longer the poor girl everyone pitted or the orphan people whispered about. She was the true heir of the Mabeso legacy. That night, back in her tiny apartment, she opened her laptop and began to plan. Her father's empire had been scattered and misused, but it wasn't lost. Piece by piece, she would rebuild it, quietly, smartly, and without warning anyone. No press conferences, no grand announcements. Just quiet power moving in the background. And as she stared at the city lights outside her window, Naledi whispered to herself, "You were right, Papa. Silence is power." From that moment on, she stopped hiding. She wasn't pretending to be broke anymore. She was preparing to rise, and nobody saw it coming. Months passed, and Lusaka kept moving, but not for Vera. Her glamorous life began to crumble faster than she could hide it. Tobias, the smooth-talking young man she thought loved her, vanished one morning, taking most of her money with him. The bank accounts she bragged about were suddenly empty. The jewelry she hadn't sold was fake. Creditors started calling, and the friends who once filled her parties stopped answering her messages. The mansion that once buzzed with guests now echoed with silence. Vera tried to sell more properties, only to find most were gone, quietly bought under someone else's name. She didn't know it yet, but that someone else was Naledi. While Vera's world was falling apart, Naledi's was rising higher than ever. She had spent months working in the shadows, learning, planning, and investing. When she was finally ready, she launched her own real estate brand, Mabeso Estates, named after her mother's maiden name. The name carried dignity and warmth, far from the cold reputation her father's empire had gained under Vera's control. At first, no one paid attention. People wondered who this new developer was, quietly buying land and starting construction projects. But soon the city began to notice. Mabeso Estates built modern apartments, affordable yet beautiful, with clean designs and solid foundations. Investors from South Africa and Kenya started flying in, curious about the young woman behind it all. Deals poured in, and within months, her projects were being featured in magazines and business newspapers. Reporters called her the mysterious young mogul transforming Lusaka's skyline. Her face appeared on magazine covers, but she kept her interviews short and graceful. When asked about her background, she only said, "I learned from the best." No one knew she was the daughter of the man who once owned half the city. Meanwhile, Vera was sitting in a small rented house, flipping through the newspaper one morning when she saw the headline, Mabeso Estates, the woman redefining Lusaka real estate. Her eyes froze on the photo, Naledi, dressed in an elegant suit, smiling confidently beside her new development. For a second, Vera's heart stopped. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. "She's just pretending to be rich," she muttered to herself. "Probably found a rich boyfriend or some sponsor." But deep down, fear crept in. The name, the face, the calm eyes, they all felt too familiar. She couldn't shake the feeling that the girl she had once thrown out with one suitcase had returned, stronger than ever. As Vera sat in silence, the city outside buzzed with excitement over Mabeso Estates. Naledi, on the other hand, stayed focused. She didn't want revenge to drive her, only purpose. She wanted to build something lasting, something that honored her father and her mother's name. And quietly, she was doing exactly that. Vera's downfall had begun. Naledi's rise had only just started. The mansion that once made Vera feel untouchable was now a ghost house. The tall gates were locked, the swimming pool was green with algae, and the rooms echoed with emptiness. When the government officials came with notice papers, Vera tried to bluff, saying there was some mistake. But there wasn't. The mansion was being repossessed because of unpaid taxes and mounting debts. She stood on the driveway watching as they sealed the front door, her world collapsing right in front of her. She packed what little she had left, a few dresses, old handbags, and the framed photo of her late husband she once pretended to cherish. Tobias was long gone. He hadn't called, texted, or shown up since taking her last savings. When she tried to reach him, his number was disconnected. The friends who once clinked champagne glasses with her suddenly had no time to talk. Her calls went unanswered, her invitations ignored. She was alone. Eventually, Vera moved into a small rental on the edge of town, a cramped two-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and noisy neighbors. The woman who used to hold garden parties and drink imported wine now had to count every coin for groceries. Pride kept her from asking for help, but at night she would sit by the window and whisper, "How did I end up like this?" Then, one afternoon, she got a call from a property agent. "Mrs. Vera, there's interest in the last Mabeso land on Manda Hill," he said. Her heart lifted for the first time in months. Maybe this was her chance to start over. She dressed in her best clothes, a bit faded now but still elegant, and walked into the business meeting, ready to sell the last piece of her late husband's legacy. But when she stepped into the conference room, her world stopped. Sitting at the end of the long glass table was Naledi, calm, confident, and beautifully composed in a navy blue suit. Vera froze, her lips trembling. What are you doing here?" she stammered. Naledi looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. "Buying what you never owned," she said softly. The room went silent. Vera blinked, confused, as Naledi opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, legal papers, ownership transfers, and signatures. Every single one proved that the property, and everything else, belonged to Naledi. Vera's face turned pale. Her hands shook as she picked up the papers, her throat dry. "This can't be," she whispered. "It is," Naledi replied calmly. "You built your life on what wasn't yours. Now it's time to let it go." The meeting ended in silence. Vera walked out of that building slower than she had ever walked before, her heels clicking weakly against the floor. She had lost everything, money, pride, friends, and now the last reminder of her power. Across the room, Naledi watched her leave, not with anger, but with quiet satisfaction. The woman who once threw her out with nothing had finally met the end she created herself. The next morning, Naledi was in her office, reviewing a new development plan when the door burst open. Vera stormed in, her eyes red and wild, her once perfect hair a mess. The receptionist tried to stop her, but she pushed past, shouting, "You tricked me, Naledi. You set me up." The room fell silent. The staff nearby froze, pretending not to listen but clearly curious. Naledi didn't raise her voice. She simply closed her folder, leaned back in her chair, and looked up at Vera calmly. "No," she said. "You tricked yourself." Vera slammed her hand on the desk. "You took everything from me," she shouted, her voice cracking. Naledi's expression didn't change. "I took back what was already mine," she said softly. "You took, lied, and destroyed without earning a single thing. You thought my father's name was a shortcut to power. but all you did was bury it in grief. Vera's anger melted into tears. She sank into the chair across from Naledi, her voice breaking. I only wanted security, she said quietly. After your father died, I was scared. I didn't know how to live without him. I thought if I had money, I'd be safe. Naledi looked at her for a long moment. For the first time, she saw not the cruel woman who had tormented her, but a broken one, someone who had built her entire life on fear and appearances. Still, the pain Vera had caused couldn't be ignored. You destroyed his name for comfort, Naledi said gently. You sold his dreams for handbags and champagne. You fired people who were loyal to him. You laughed while I struggled. She paused, her voice calm but firm. And now, you'll face the consequences. Vera wiped her tears with shaky hand. What do you want from me? You've already won. Naledi stood, walking around the desk until she was standing beside her. I don't want revenge, she said. I want you to learn. You once told me I'd figure out my life. Now it's your turn. She handed Vera a small white envelope. Inside was a job offer letter, a position as a clerk in the administration department of Mabeso Estates. Vera looked at it in disbelief. You want me to work for you? She whispered. Naledi nodded. If you want to survive, yes. You'll earn your living honestly for once. No luxury, no lies, just work. Vera's pride shattered right there in that office. Her eyes filled with shame and confusion. It was humiliation, but it was also mercy. Naledi could have destroyed her completely, yet she didn't. As Vera stood to leave, she turned back once more. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. Naledi smiled faintly. Because my father would have wanted me to show strength, not cruelty. Vera left the office in silence, clutching the envelope like it was her last lifeline. And for the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar, humility. Vera's first day at Mabeso Estates felt like stepping into a different world. The office was bright, modern, and full of young professionals moving with purpose. Everyone seemed to admire Naledi, the calm, confident woman they called Madam CEO. Vera stood by the front desk, clutching her small handbag, waiting for instructions, her heart pounding with embarrassment. The HR manager greeted her politely, but without any special treatment. You'll be in the admin department, she said, filing, organizing documents, and updating property records. Vera nodded, forcing a smile, even though inside, she wanted to disappear. She was used to giving orders, not following them. Her desk was small, tucked in the corner near the photocopy machine. As she sorted through stacks of paperwork, she could hear employees passing by, laughing softly and greeting Naledi with respect. Good morning, Madam CEO. They'd say, their voices filled with admiration. Each time Vera heard it, her chest tightened. That title, the one she once believed belonged to her, now belonged to the girl she had treated like nothing. At lunchtime, she sat alone, eating from a small plastic container while others chatted around her. She could feel the whispers. Everyone knew who she was. They didn't say it to her face, but she saw the looks, a mix of pity and quiet judgment. Word had already spread through Lusaka. The same woman who mocked her stepdaughter was now working. Across the office, Naledi carried herself with quiet authority. She didn't gloat or humiliate Vera. She treated her like any other employee, professional, distant, polite. No revenge, no sharp words, just cold fairness. That was almost harder to bear. One afternoon, Vera accidentally bumped into Naledi in the hallway. She froze, mumbling an apology, but Naledi simply nodded and walked past, her expression unreadable. It was respect without warmth, and it hurt more than anger ever could. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Vera began to change. She stopped wearing heavy makeup and designer shoes. She came to work early, stayed late, and focused on doing her tasks right. Filing papers, answering phones, fetching reports. The simple things she once considered beneath her became her daily routine. And oddly enough, it started to feel good. For the first time in her life, she was earning her place honestly. Rumors continued to spread through Lusaka's business circle. People couldn't stop talking about the twist of fate, how the once arrogant widow had fallen, and how her stepdaughter now ran the empire with grace and power. Some even said, Naledi is her father's daughter through and through. Vera heard those words and didn't argue. She couldn't, because deep down, she finally saw the truth. Naledi wasn't just her late husband's daughter, she was his legacy. And as Vera sat quietly at her desk, filing another folder marked Mabeso Estates, she whispered to herself, he raised the right one. The ballroom sparkled with golden lights and elegant chatter, as Lusaka's most powerful people gathered for the annual charity gala. Reporters moved around with cameras, snapping photos of the city's rising stars. At the center of it all stood Naledi, dressed in a sleek white gown, calm and graceful. Mabeso Estates had just donated millions to build homes for underprivileged families, a gesture that made her one of the most admired young women in the country. Vera stood in the back of the room, almost hidden among the crowd. She had come quietly, invited through the company's staff list. She wore a simple black dress, her eyes never leaving Naledi. Watching her stepdaughter move confidently among the crowd made her heart ache. The girl she had once called useless was now being applauded by the same society that used to bow to Vera herself. When the event host invited Naledi to speak, the room fell silent. Cameras flashed, microphones lifted. Naledi stepped up to the podium and smiled. "I'm often asked how I built all this," she began, her voice calm but strong. "But the truth is, I didn't build it alone. My father laid the foundation. I only protected what he created." Reporters leaned forward, hungry for more. Naledi paused, letting her words settle. "My father taught me one thing," she continued. "Silence is power. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They simply need time to speak for themselves." The audience broke into soft applause. To most, it sounded like a simple quote, elegant and wise. But to Vera, it was a message. She felt it hit deep, like a mirror reflecting every wrong she had done. Naledi hadn't exposed her. She hadn't gone to the media to humiliate her or tell the world how she'd been betrayed. She had stayed silent, worked hard, and let time reveal everything. As Naledi finished her speech, the crowd rose to its feet, clapping and cheering. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashing from every angle. But Naledi didn't bask in the attention. She simply smiled, thanked everyone, and walked off the stage with quiet confidence. Vera felt her throat tighten as tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she truly saw Naledi, not as the stepdaughter she had despised, but as the woman her late husband had always believed she would become. Strong, kind, disciplined, and loyal to his memory. As the applause continued, Vera whispered to herself, "You were never weak." "I was." She wiped her tears quickly, afraid someone might see. Naledi's words kept echoing in her mind. Silence is power. It was in that silence that Naledi had rebuilt everything Vera had destroyed. And now, standing in that crowded room full of lights and cameras, Vera finally understood. The girl she had once thrown away had not only reclaimed her father's empire, but his honor too. The morning was quiet and bright when Naledi walked through the cemetery, a small bouquet of white lilies in her hand. The grass was wet with dew, and the air smelled fresh after the rain. She stopped at her father's grave, a simple marble stone engraved with his name and the words, "A builder of dreams." Gently, she placed the flowers down and brushed away a few fallen leaves. For a long moment, she just stood there, her eyes soft, her heart full. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "They took everything, but I took back your name." Her voice didn't shake. It was calm, strong, and full of peace. She smiled faintly, looking up at the clear blue sky. There was no bitterness left in her, only gratitude. Her father's dream was alive again, stronger than ever. A few steps away, her driver waited beside a black Range Rover, holding a folder with the documents for her next big project, a foundation for orphaned girls. It was her way of giving back, of helping other young girls who had lost everything like she once had. The foundation would carry her father's name, but its heart would carry her mother's compassion. As Naledi walked back toward the car, a figure stood under a tree not far away. It was Vera. She didn't approach. She just watched quietly, her eyes glistening. For the first time, there was no anger, no envy, only a quiet sadness and respect. "You became everything he hoped for," Vera whispered softly, her voice breaking. Naledi opened the car door and took one last look at the grave. Then she smiled, not at the past, but at the future waiting ahead. She didn't look back, because she no longer needed to.